Hey, folks, Bruce Parkman here. Welcome to another episode of Broken Brain, sponsored by the Mac Parkman Foundation, where we focus on the issue of repetitive brain trauma, whether it's repetitive head impacts from contact sports or repetitive blast exposure for our military veterans, and how these injuries are affecting the mental health of a huge segment of our population that we are not really educated on. So we go out there and we find the leaders, researchers, the leading authors, the leading scientists, and parents, and victims, and professional players, everywhere we can find, to bring you the latest perspectives on repetitive brain trauma and how we can heal it. Because you are going to be the advocate for this, for the ones that you love. Today, we have an amazing podcast, somebody that I've found out I've known for quite a while, Ms. Jami Uretsky, out of Boston, Massachusetts. And she started the Concussion Mom. If you've ever paid it, you need to pay attention to the Concussion Mom, because they are a leading advocate for changes in education awareness when it comes to concussions. But this got started when her daughter suffered a life-changing concussion while playing a high school soccer game in 2011. And so she started her own social media operation to bring awareness about this, called Concussion Mom. She's a certified brain fitness coach, which I didn't even know existed. So I'd love some more information on that, because we definitely need more brain fitness coaches in this world. And she is an active activist, and I can attest to this, when it comes to promoting concussion education and awareness, because there's not enough of this out there. She wrote a chapter for the best-selling book, Concussed Sports, Related Head Injuries, Prevention, Coping, and Real Stories, as well as numerous print articles and blog postings. She's been in a professional video for Blower Hockey. And then she, as well as the documentary Overcoming TBI, was featured at the International Brain Injury Conference in New Orleans. And she's obviously a frequent guest on podcasts, radio shows, and she does a ton of education awareness in the issues of concussions, which we need to talk more about, especially when it's caused by repetitive impact. So, Jami, thank you so much for coming on the show. So tell us, how did you get here? I mean, what got you? I mean, obviously, it sounds like your daughter, thank God, I mean, if she's okay, but it sounds like you got introduced to this the way that we all get into this, from some near tragic experience.
That is correct. She was playing in a high school soccer game. She had actually hurt her leg, so she wasn't supposed to play. And since I wasn't there, she talked the coach into letting her play. And I got a call on my way there. I was going to the game, but I didn't have to be there right when it started because she wasn't supposed to play. So I got a call when I was on my way from one of her friends saying she had gotten hurt. She was okay sitting on the bench. She hurt her head, but she was fine, but they just wanted to let me know. So I got there, and she was sitting on the bench. She was a little dazed. Wasn't terrible. They did diagnose her with a concussion on the field. We had a very good trainer at our high school. And he suggested that I take her to the hospital. And my husband was away that weekend, and I was trying to decide, do I take her to the hospital? She didn't seem that bad. And finally I said, I think I just need to do this. So I took her to the emergency room. It was a head injury, so they took her right away. And they diagnosed her with a concussion and told me to see my primary care physician. This was a Thursday, to see my primary care physician as soon as possible, her pediatrician at the time, because she was 15. So she is a very, very competitive person. So she was not interested in staying home from school the next day. This was just not going to be affecting her life. So as the night wore on, she got worse and worse. I said, I think you should send an email to your teachers, let them know that you might not be at school tomorrow. Oh, no, I'm going to go to school. I said, okay, but let's just let them know. Well, we turned on the computer and she couldn't really see it. She started to not make sense. Everything was blurry. So I wrote the email for her. Still, I really didn't know what was going to be in store for me. If you do not live this, I don't think you can fully understand how invasive it is in your life. I had taken like a concussion training thing that all the parents had to take. We had to sign our name that we took it, but I didn't even pay that much attention to it because I figured it's not going to happen to me. Anyway, she couldn't go to school the next day, called the pediatrician. We went to see her. She was actually extremely well educated in concussions, which back in 2011, that was not always the case.
Right.
So we got there. They had the room all darkened for her, and she was really pretty bad by this point. No sunlight, couldn't focus, really bad headaches. Just really wasn't herself. She's a very vivacious, full of personality type of a person. Her personality was completely flat. It was just nothing. She had no short-term memory. The trip to the doctor, we go, it's like a lot of back roads, very bumpy, and every bump really bothered her. So the ride itself was difficult. And then we got there and she had to fill out a sheet with all the symptoms. And, you know, the doctor said she's got a concussion. She can't go to school next week. And I want to see her back in a week. So that went on for probably 2 months. And
Wow.
then, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's, and when you talk about education and concussions, back in 2011, a concussion was a headache, right?
Right.
And in our kids, I think back to when my son got his first concussion. I was on a business trip in Australia, and I came home a week later, and everything seemed fine. Of course, I've had concussions, so you weren't even looking for changes. So thank goodness that your daughter, unfortunately, displayed some mechanism, because given her competitive nature, she probably would have just kept going. No.
Yeah. Well, after these 2 months, it was very difficult for her to be kept down. However, there was no choice. She had no short-term memory. Friends would come over to visit. She would have no idea that they had come to visit. She
Wow.
couldn't remember her way around our house. She wanted to drink a water. She couldn't remember where the cups were. I had to have the shades drawn at all times. I mean, it was very, very severe. So we were then sent to a concussion specialist, Dr. Cantu, and he became her primary doctor for this. She has actually never been formally released from his care to this day. So that was
Cantu's one of the best out there when
oh
it
yeah,
comes to head injuries.
absolutely. But that took us down a whole new road. My own personal journey was week to week. Okay, next week she'll be able to do this. Next week she'll be able to do this. All her friends are getting their licenses. When it's time for her to get a license, she'll be fine by then. These milestones were never met. And when you're a 15-year-old girl, that is tough. No social life, nothing. Really difficult.
So let's talk about the injury a little bit, because a lot of people assume that soccer is not a contact sport. Yet you have, heading the ball, you have midair collisions, you have, collisions on the ground. And while it's not football or hockey, when you start talking about heading the ball, and we've had some tragedies where young men and women like to practice heading the ball and have absolutely gave themselves brain damage and mental illness, and unfortunately are no longer here. So how did so for the benefit of our audience to understand that there's a reason why we're saying, wait, before we start banging the head on, heading soccer balls, you really take away the accidents, right? The accidents happen. So how did she get hurt on the field?
She was running down the field. She was a defender, and the offensive person from the other team was running behind her and tripped her. And she was running very fast, and she went up in the air, up, fell straight down, and right here is where
On
she
her
hit.
forehead.
Yeah, and then she snapped her
Wow.
neck.
And those are hard fields, especially if they're not grass and dirt like the old days either.
Right. Yep. And she
Wow.
snapped her neck. She went straight up in the air, fell right back down again, same place, and snapped her neck again.
Dang. Yeah, and that's what's so important to our parents, that we try to educate. And we'll talk about what the primary points of where you're at is, that you have to be on the lookout. Thank God you had a doctor that wanted back, or that the symptoms were severe enough, because most concussions, the kids, they seem all right 2 or 3 days later, even the next day, but they're not. And we now know that this is a brain injury, and it's very, very serious. So how long did it take for you to get your daughter back?
Probably maybe 6 years.
6 years. Wow. As
I
a
mean,
parent too.
she's not
Wow.
100% right now. I'm not sure she ever will be. But yeah, it took a very long time.
Wow. I mean, I'm so sorry to hear that. And obviously, during this journey, you must have, you became a doctor, right? I mean, basically you're now a concussion doctor because even though you're under Dr. Cantu's care, I mean, he's one of the best. You know, nobody looks out for a kid like Mama Bear. So what did you do to educate yourself in order to provide your daughter the best possible care that she could get?
Well, she needed round the clock care. So I had to
Wow.
stop working and I stayed home with her. She didn't go to school for months and months, almost a year actually.
No kidding.
Yeah, and when she
Yeah.
went back, she only went a couple hours. She went to private school. We were very lucky that there were certain protocols that could be implemented for her. But she didn't fully go back to school for a year. So I was home with her. Um, she couldn't really leave the house for a while because she couldn't do anything. She would tell me that when she would walk, the impact of her foot on the ground went right up into her head. Things you would never
Mm.
think of. So she slept a lot. And so while she slept, I researched and I found that taking care of these head injuries is not a linear thing. There are so many different components to it. And one of hers was whiplash. Um, and then with these, you sort of have to treat them symptom by symptom as opposed to a broken bone. You do what you do, but these you have to treat by symptom. So it's hit or miss what works. So you have to try certain things, give them a little time, see if they work. Then you move on to the next when that one stops working. It took a long, long time. We did years of this.
Did they use any like the treatment techniques on your daughter? What were some of the techniques that she passed through in order to improve her brain health, in order to stimulate growth and improve her memory and things like that?
One of the things that we started at home was a very, very clean diet, which did help some. We went to there. People think when you go to a chiropractor, they just adjust you and crack you. There are so many different types of chiropractors that have very, very different specialties. So we went to one that does just upper cervical procedures. He would measure her neck, the angle, the x-rays, and then it almost looked like a big protractor to me. Do you remember protractors from
Yeah,
school?
yeah, yeah.
And it would be a very, very precise little push on her neck. And that was it. That was all he did. And it helped for a
Mm.
while. We went to a chiropractor who did muscle memory, kinesiology. We went to regular standard chiropractors, but they did, I think, more harm than good with the adjustments. We went to physical therapy. We went to an herbalist. We actually lived in a town, Marblehead, Mass at the time, and there was a world famous herbalist who was in our town, and we went to her, and she was very helpful. But I would say the most helpful thing that we did was something called functional neurology. Have you heard of that?
No, ma'am. I'm learning every day.
Okay, so they're chiropractors, and they have very advanced training in neurology, and they go to a place in Florida, actually, the Carrick Center. Dr. Ted Carrick is the father of functional neurology. He's a Harvard grad,
Hmm.
and they they do all kinds of brain eye coordination, balance, um, things you could never imagine. She had all kinds of work that she had to do at home, sometimes 2 hours a day of rehab that she would have to do.
Wow.
Sometimes things as simple as like her first assignment, I'll call it, was they gave her a post-it note with a dot on it. And she had a certain pattern that she had to follow that dot a certain number of times every day. And it actually helped. It's something as simple as that. And then from there, they build on that um, to get her better. And I actually took her there in May of her senior year of high school. So this was 3 years later because she was going to college. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know how she's going to go to college. You know, she got in, she wanted to go, but I just did not know how she was going to live away. So I said, I have one more chance. I had 3 months with her to get her back. And I took her to this functional neurologist and she went.
Wow. So, like during this journey too, how was your experience with insurance with some of these modalities? Was it covered? Was it out of pocket? Because we're finding out that, man, a lot of these things that can help the brain, insurance won't cover unless it's drugs or therapy.
That is correct. It was all out of pocket.
Wow. So the thing, and who directed you to? Did you find out this on your own, or did Dr. Cantu or some other folks say, "Hey, try all this"? And I mean, here you are, obviously grieving, for somebody that you love that's not, that's been harmed, and you're doing everything you can to improve their life because they've got a whole life to live. And so, did you find these treatments on your own, or were you assisted, guided in any way? Because I mean, I've never heard of Mr. Carrick, but I'll be looking him up and inviting him on the show. That's for sure.
I did it all on my own.
Wow.
This is what I did while she slept. I, I had no choice. She was laying in bed and couldn't move. Couldn't see because she had her pupils were so large. Those Her pupils were so big for so long. I mean, it was probably maybe 3 years ago that they seemed to be okay. So this has been a very long, long time.
Wow, and it's still ongoing. And that's why, to our audience, educating yourself. We come across this all the time. It's like I had to educate myself in the issue of repetitive head impacts. There's no information on it. Here we talk about a TBI that's impacted this young lady for, all this time. So, all right, here you are, you're researching, your daughter's healing, not as fast as you want to go, and you decide to do something about it. And you became concussion mom, like superhero. All right. So how did that, tell me about that? How did that come about?
So I did have a lot of people help me along the way because as I did my research, I called everybody that I could find to
Bet you
see if
did.
they could help me. So I decided it was a lot of work that just had to be done because she was not going to get better without this. So I decided I would do this, pay it forward, because I wanted people to have a place to go for resources that I have already tried and my experience with them. So that's why I did it.
Okay. And what did you do? I mean, it's you have a website. I mean, obviously you've been, out there quite a bit, talking and speaking. And when did this all get started?
January of 2012.
So you've been a concussion mom for that long, huh?
Yes.
Good
Um,
on you.
Yep. So I did social media. I had a blog. I have my website. I did a podcast for quite a while, a radio show, just anything I could think of to get out there and help. I've gone and spoken at businesses and schools.
Good on you. Yeah, I need your agent. That's an amazing journey, and given what you've been through, and I think that's so amazing. So there's the book that you got involved with. How did you get involved with that? How did they reach out to you? Were you a co-author on that?
So it was written by mostly by Kerry Goulet and Keith Primo, who used to play for the Philadelphia Flyers.
Okay,
So during my research, one of the places that I found that was helpful to me is something called Stop Concussions, and they founded Stop Concussions. And Kerry has been very helpful to me all these years. And they were writing this book, and they asked both Madeline and I to write a chapter for the book. So she wrote one about returning to school, and I wrote one about what it's like to be the parent of a child going through this.
wow. I mean, you look at we come across so many organizations that came out of tragedy, right? And here we are. Here you are, 2024, right? 13 years or so after this incident. Are you satisfied where we're at when it comes to concussions right now and diagnosis and treatment? I mean, obviously you had a lot to learn. Where do you feel we are right now, medically? I mean, in awareness and our ability to treat these injuries.
I think we are really headed down the right path. When I started this, as you know, Dr. Cantu has a concussion clinic.
Hmm. Yes,
We
sir.
didn't even
Yes,
have
ma'am.
that back then. So there have been leaps and bounds in this. My problem with all of it is there is no cure. So you still do have to treat those symptoms symptom by symptom. There's I'm not sure how to get to the point where it's somewhat similar for everybody because it's very different for everybody.
Mm.
Everybody's brain injury is so different that there isn't one way to address it. And I still do a lot of counseling of with parents and kids who get these concussions. And they'll tell me what's wrong, they'll tell me their symptoms, and then I try to point them in the right direction, but it's always different.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, the we have, it's not like a broken leg, right? There's only basically a couple ways to treat a broken brain. You deal with a brain, and you got all the other factors of diet, extensive exposure, and so yeah, I mean, we do need a lot more focus on this, and yet we've studied it to death. I mean, we've got so many concussion studies out there, and I mean, every year we say I read so many things on concussions, which of course impacted your life. And now let's talk about the study or the concept of repetitive head impacts. Okay, those little hits that you get from hitting the soccer ball or tackling in football and rugby and hockey and lacrosse and now women's rugby is the fastest growing sport, and I know in Canada, and is growing. We had that young lady run over everybody in the Olympics, right? Yet these are contact sports, and we have children like yours with developing brains, playing these sports. What is your position on these contact sports and children playing?
So that is such a tough one because sports are so important in ways other than just the physical activity. They promote
Absolutely.
teamwork, working together, a sense of belonging. There's so much to it. So I am a huge sports fan and I am for sports, but I don't think we need to have all the head contact. Um, like in, hockey, bantam hockey. We don't need to be checking. When my son played, when our country started checking, Canada was not checking at that same age. Um, I think we could get rid of the heading of the ball in the youth soccer, up to high school. I think that we need to delay that kind of contact till at least after they're 14. The problem is the kids are not always the ones making the decisions.
Ha. Yep. Yeah. I
So,
mean,
and parents, I found through my experience, um, when your child is in high school or middle school, a lot of times your social life revolves around the youth sports.
yeah,
And if
their
that's taken,
identity.
yes. And so, for example, my daughter played hockey, she played soccer, and she ran track. That all went away. So I had a
Wow.
big social life with that. She never played high school sports again. That is something.
The No, absolutely. That I mean, the reason my son played the sports that he was playing is that the coaches came up to him, right, and the kids came up to him, and my boy just wanted to be with the gang, right. We had no idea that these back to back sports were gonna, impact him to the point, that he took his life. Right? Nobody knows that. That's why we ended up writing our book. That's why, you're working on your book because we have no idea that these sports can also, when it comes down to brains, injure people to the point where like your daughter here, 13 years, is still trying to come back. And I think that goes to the fact that as a society, we just don't appreciate the fragility of the brain and the value. We only got one of these things. And then once you deal with, your or my situation, when you start really studying the brain, you start thinking, oh my God, dude, I actually put this at risk, right? Or I needed, and to your case, I need to get on this because this is serious, right? Where so many concussions are just not really paid attention to because of lack of quality of care and standardization. So, it's a big factor, and that's why we try to focus parents on explaining with love. It's like, I love you, and you shouldn't be heading the ball. You shouldn't be tackling at this age. And we usually, we promote 18. We think that, hey, contact sports. If you can join the Army, you can bang your head up if you want. But I think you're right. Football, high school is where we're going to be challenged by, what's the rest of the world doing, and so on and so forth. So we think that delaying exposure in any way, shape, or form till at least high school is good. And then now, when your daughter, very competitive, she's played sports all year round, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And then but and at least she wasn't playing soccer, because you can play soccer year round now. You can play for the travel team, you can play for the school, you can play for these private leagues now. And parents are crazy about these sports, man. I mean, they really are, and it's something that we need to deal with. In your journey right now, okay, where do you still think there's work to be done? I mean, you say we're in a better place regarding concussions. Where can we improve? Where can we improve as parents, as a medical community, as society, on the position on when it comes to brain health and sports, or just concussions alone? Where can we go? Where can we go for? How do we make it better?
I really think, as you have said in the past, education is key, because if you know what the risk that you're putting your child at, you're going to do something about it. I think that a lot of parents really do not
Bingo.
understand that. So my daughter's was a very acute situation, as opposed to the repetitive head injuries,
Right.
repetitive hits. So there's two different modalities there, the repetitive and then the acute, both terrible. And parents just need to be aware that the repetitive is often worse than what my daughter had. So I couldn't not be aware, because she was a completely different person. When it's just the repetitive and not necessarily concussions, you're not really aware of what's going on.
No.
That's where the education comes in.
And you're right. I mean, there are so many days when I wish my son would have had a career-ending injury, right, on anything, right? And he did. I mean, he had a concussion. It was his third one in 2 years, and I asked the coach. I said, "I'm done. How many concussions could my son have in ninth grade?" Right? And they said, "We don't know, but here's the book." And he never had another one. I never had a reason to pull my son, and he kept soldiering on all through these years of pain and misery, not able to communicate. And you don't see that. I mean, because the kids hide it so well, and then when they get older, they get a little bit more distant because they're joining the Army or whatever. They're getting to be adults who wants to be around mom and dad all the time, and then they just act in such a loving manner till you get this text one day saying, "I can't be here no more." And I wish that, not that I wish I was in your shoes. I never would wish this kind of pain on anybody, or your pain for that matter, right? I am absolutely just, heartbroken for what you've had to go through as a parent because of an accident. But your resiliency, your tenacity, your perseverance has allowed you to be here today as a subject matter expert on this issue. And you're a brain coach, right? I mean, what's the title again? A certified brains fitness coach, right?
Well,
But
yeah.
I mean, you had to get there through tragedy. But tell me about that. I didn't even know that existed. So what's all that? Did you go to Harvard or something and get that, or what?
I just took a course online to educate myself about
Really?
it. Yeah, it was a
Nice.
program. Actually, Madeline, my daughter, took it with me.
No kidding. Who sponsors that?
It was called the Spencer Institute.
I would recommend everybody that's listening to this podcast go online. I'm going to go do it. And because it's all about education and awareness. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're starting to realize, man, we only got one brain. And if you're hurting, we do know that there's a lot of new ways to treat the brain, but we have to prioritize brain health in this country. And
Yes.
I do think that, because of the incidents like you've had to go through and what I've had to go through, we're getting there, but it's still not a part of our standard care. And our insurance systems reflect that. Our coverage reflects that. The fact that you have to become a brain coach as a mom and I have to write a book as a dad, reflect the fact that we are not educated in the fragility of the brain and the importance of the brain at the same time. So we just throw our kids out there. We think that helmets protect their brain. They don't do a darn thing. They protect the skull, but they don't do anything for the brain. In terms of research, where are we at right now? Is there any, we've researched a lot. There's a lot of research on concussions. Are you seeing that to start permeate in the medical community? I mean, the fact that you had a doctor that saw your daughter, multiple times, which is amazing. It doesn't happen in most of the concussion cases that we're aware of right here in America. I mean, and so in your journey and your talks right now, where are your concerns? What can we do to improve more?
Well, I will say to your point, one of the issues that I do find is that insurance does not cover a lot of these treatments. And that is a problem because I would say most people cannot afford them.
Yes, ma'am.
They're very expensive. They're very helpful. And I don't know what to do without them because sometimes you don't just get better. You have to retrain your brain. So this research with all the neuroplasticity, and my daughter, for example, this brain injury changed the whole course of her life. She did not plan to do with her life what she is doing if not for this brain injury.
Yeah, tell the audience where she works right now.
So she actually did a lot of volunteer work for the Brain Injury Association of America, and she was at their annual conference giving a talk one year, and Dr. Stern from the CTE Center heard her. And I don't know, maybe 2 years later, 3 years later, something like that, she sent her resume to Dr. McKee because she wanted a tour of the lab. She was now in college at this point and she was majoring in neuroscience and she just wanted a tour of the lab. Dr. McKee forwarded her resume to Dr. Stern and they called her and said, "Oh, come on in." So she thought she was going in to look at the lab. And he said, "I heard you speak at the brain injury conference. Would like to have you here as an intern." And so that's how she started. And then she just stayed there until this past July, doing research on CTE. And now she is at UConn getting a PhD in clinical neuropsychology.
Wow. And she's gotten back to the point where she's able to do that. That is so amazing. Yep. And she probably worked on that study that we funded that we finally looked at all brains under 30, 162 brains up there, including my son's. And 40% of them had CTE, but 100% of them had structural damage to the brain. 100% of them had cognitive behavioral or psychological disorders, and 80% of them died from suicide. It is unbelievable what we have found out in that study and why we need folks like you to get out there with us and help us push so much for change. As we close out, what are your recommendations to parents? So we got parents on this podcast, they're all moms and dads. They're concerned. They're listening to this. You've been through a lot. You've educated yourself. What are your recommendations to our parents out there on anything from concussions, repetitive head impacts, to, the contact sports? What do you have to say?
I would say that if you are going to have your child play a contact sport, you really need to do a lot of research. You need to go and be there, see when they get hit. You can't take a back seat to this. You have to be involved in the sport with them in a way, because there is no way to know exactly what is happening sometimes until it's too late. So you have to educate yourself, the psychological issues that might come up. you can't just brush them off as, oh, it's teenager stuff, or because
Teenage, right? Yeah.
it might
Yep.
not be. So
Yeah.
you have to be hyper aware if you want your child to play contact sports. I don't recommend the contact sports till, high school. But if you do choose to do that, you really do need to educate yourself, because your child's not going to educate themselves and they're going to want to
No.
play.
Yeah.
It's up to the parent to do that.
Yeah, when you educate yourself, take a look at where your son's or daughter's brain is at that time. It's just
Yep.
not in a position to be absorbing, those blows. So, how do people find you? How do they follow Jami Uretsky and all your journeys and become familiar with who you are, Concussion Mom? How do they track you, and what do you have going on? What's next? What's next for you?
So they can find me on Instagram, Twitter. I have my website, concussionmom.com. I'm hoping to work on a second book with Kerry Goulet from Stop Concussions.
Okay.
We've started talking about that, and I just keep doing what I'm doing, educating. People find me and call me for help. That's pretty much what I have been doing lately.
Well, Jami, you're doing an amazing job. And I cannot thank you enough for coming on this podcast, sharing your story, your daughter's story. And I thank you for the work that you've done with our parents around this country, because this is a huge issue. And we are not yet addressing it in the way we're getting better, as you said. But we still have a long way to go to prioritize brain health and understand that we need to change the way we play these sports, and we need to change the way that we treat these people when they're injured, to include covering the modalities that are going to improve their brain health, and
Right.
not say no or force their parents to sell cars or whatever they got to do, mortgage homes, or, go out of pocket. I mean, these are legitimate medical modalities that are proven, and they should be covered. So, man, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I cannot thank you enough for your passion. I wish you the best.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do.
And don't forget, again, as I close, free book online. Go get it. Read it. 88 pages. You'll know more about repetitive head impacts and concussions, almost as much as Jami, but more than most of the medical people that you're going to encounter in your life. And you need to know this for your kids and daughters. Jami, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Another great episode of Broken Brains. And we look forward to wishing you the best for the future. And our podcast, for our audience, we'll see you again next week on Broken Brains. Thank you so much. Take care.